Ever since their introduction in Generation 2, held items have had a massive impact on competitive Pokemon, both in the official VGC doubles format and in Smogon singles. Now, of course, because it's what I know, I'm going to primarily focus on singles, where I feel like there's slightly less variety when it comes to viable items. In VGC, you see a lot of one-time use items used, mainly because of the faster, more aggressive nature of the meta, most of the time. But in singles, you do see people kinda rely on the same couple items time and time again. There are reliable options that you're going to be drawn to naturally, like Lefties, Life Orb, the choice items, Focus Sash, Assault Vest, all that stuff. However, there are definitely some niche cases where Pokemon are taking advantage of items that you typically don't see in the vast majority of your games, and I think that's a super interesting topic, so that's what we're going to be covering today. Obviously, this isn't going to be looking at, like, every niche use of every item. You know, I don't really care if fucking Strongest Chew can utilize the red Bingus pretty well in Generation Fuck. Whatever. This is just a couple cases where I particularly find it interesting. This isn't like an overview of everything. It's more like, hey, check out when Thing uses Thing. That's cool, right? Now, unfortunately, because we're talking about something introduced in Generation 2, this means I don't really get to talk about my favorite generation of competitive Pokemon, Generation 1. Which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is. We'll get back to Generation 1 another day. And also, if you want to be like a massive, like, turbo dweeb about, like Omega nerd, right? You could kind of argue that there are held items in Generation 1 because certain Pokemon, when transferred from Generation 1 to 2 with a time capsule, they'll be holding an item when they arrive in Generation 2. For example, if you transfer a Pikachu, I believe it will always be holding a Light Ball. But, shut the fuck up, I don't care. Doesn't count. Shut up, let's talk about some cool shit. First off, I'd like to talk about what I sort of consider the poster child for niche items, even though a decent amount of Pokemon actually use it, especially in the first two generations it was available, and that's Expert Belt. You could kinda argue if this one's actually niche, but it's definitely fallen off in recent generations, and I find it pretty interesting, so we're gonna talk about it anyway. The Expert Belt is an offensive item that increases your damage by 20% if your move is super effective. Expert Belt definitely isn't bad, but it's sort of outclassed by Life Orb a lot of the time. Life Orb gives you a 30% boost in damage, super effective or not, and the only downside is that you lose 10% of your health whenever you attack. Life Orb is really good for offensively inclined Pokemon who probably weren't expecting to survive too many hits anyways, but Expert Belt does have its uses. Expert Belt's lack of a downside is quite nice for bulkier mixed attackers who want to stick around for a couple of turns while still throwing off decently powerful attacks. So while generally Expert Belt is a little outclassed in its intended purpose, it's got a very valuable niche, and that's in bluffing choice items. See, after you attack with a Life Orb, the opponent watches you lose 10% of your health, so it's a giveaway to what you're running. But that's not the case with Expert Belt because there's no downside. Now, choice items are much more popular than Expert Belt. They give you a massive increase in power, or Choice Scarf, which gives you an increase in speed, so it's generally not as good for bluffing Choice Scarf because, you know, Expert Belt makes you stronger, but it don't fucking make you no faster. I remember one of the most famous uses of this, back when it was legal and overused, was Genesect in Generation 5. That thing was a monster, and it was primarily due to its choice sets. They were incredibly powerful. But what Expert Belt allowed it to do was bluff those choice sets. You could get killed by a Bug Buzz, let's say, and the opponent will go, damn, but hey, it's not running a Life Orb. I guess I can send in something that resists Bug Buzz and force it out. And then you switch in, and you get smacked with Flamethrower. This bluff is honestly the main draw of Expert Belt in my opinion, and it's kind of funny because I doubt it's something they thought about when designing the item, but it's a really cool little use, and it's a shame that in Generation 7 and 8, Expert Belt has definitely fallen to the wayside. Not as many Pokemon run it anymore. Now you could argue I've already fucked up by starting my video on niche items in competitive Pokemon with an item that you could argue isn't niche. So let's fuck it up even further and talk about an item that's definitely not niche, because it fucking sucked. Berserk Gene was introduced in Generation 2, and it's, in my opinion, one of the most interesting items in the series, because not only was it introduced in Generation 2, but that shit stayed in Generation 2, which is not the case for most items. Most items are introduced, and then they stick around for the rest of the series. Berserk Gene was in one generation, and that's it. So, why was that? Well, Berserk Gene is one of the few offensively orientated items in Generation 2. It increases your attack by 2 when you switch in, but it confuses the user and is then consumed. And reminder, when you hit yourself in confusion, that's taking into account your boosted attack, so you could potentially do a lot of damage to yourself on top of wasting your turn. Berserk Gene is weird because technically it's kind of niche since anything could really benefit from it, but it's a big fucking could, because at the same time it could just completely backfire on you. And as for why it didn't come back in later generations, I think there's a few reasons. One is that abilities were introduced in Generation 3, and there are abilities that prevent confusion, which in combination with this item would be really, really overpowered. It's pretty much a swords dance that you don't have to do shit for. And on top of that, it's just kind of a lame item, you know? It's very, very luck reliant, and the payoff if you actually get the luck you need is massive. So, maybe Game Freak realized that this item, you know, wasn't that fun, so they axed it. Either way, I think they made the right move. This shit's kinda lame. Items in Generation 2 are honestly a little bit messy. On the offensive side, you've got, you know, Berserk Gene, which it's just too inconsistent. And the items that boost moves of a certain type, such as Never Melt Ice, which boosts the power of ice moves, and Charcoal, which boosts the power of fire type moves, they're not that great. Generation 4 onwards, it's a 20% boost, and even then, they're pretty rarely seen. In Generations 2 and 3, it's only a 10% boost, which is very, very small. Before Generation 4, these items are really only used when Pokemon just really need that extra tiny bit of punch just to take out a specific threat. For example, in Generation 3, Magneton might run Magnet specifically to secure a KO on defensive Skarmory with its Thunderbolt. So in Generation 2, while on the offensive side items are kinda meh, on the defensive side, you've got Leftovers, which is by a mile the best item in the game. Almost everything can or will always run Leftovers. Most teams are going to have 6 Pokemon using it, and it makes sense. It's just free health recovery every turn. Compared to what? A tiny 10% boost or an inconsistent strat with Berserk Gene? Most of the time you're just going to stick to consistent health gain. There are a few exceptions, but it's mainly Pokemon-specific stuff, such as Marowak. Marowak will always run Thick Club, because for Marowak and Cubone only, that is a free doubled attack stat. It's what makes Marowak good in Generation 2 and gives them any kind of a niche in Generation 3. Without Thick Club, Marowak is useless. So, in a generation where Leftovers is so powerful, what are you going to do about it? You just going to sit there and accept that everything has leftovers? Well, there is one thing you can do, and you can run, potentially, one of the most devious items of all to counter leftovers, and that is nothing. You don't run any item. No item. Nothing. Trust me, there's a point to this, I swear. So let's say the opponent has an item and you want that item gone. What are you going to do about it? Well, in Generation 3, 4, and 5, you're going to use Knockoff. Knockoff is a 20 base power Dark type move that has the side effect of removing the opponent's item. This was really cool, and in Generations 3 to 5, the move had pretty limited distribution, which made it special. I really liked it. It was a fun little utility that had a big impact over the course of the game. Personally, I've never really liked the Gen 6 knockoff buffs. It felt very unnecessary to me. Like, now with the increased power, it feels like the move is less about the utility and more smack them for big damage. Oh, by the way, their item's gone. I don't really know why they did that. Is it because Mega Stones were introduced and you can't knock them off? Is it because knockoff was always kind of shit in single player because, like, the CPU trainers don't hold held items most of the time. Well, I mean, that's its own problem. Why don't they have items? Why do, like, none of the AI trainers in single player have items? Like, Game Freak, you made, like, 200 items, and yet every fucking game, you want to teach the player about, like, 4 berries and maybe the focus sash. Like, come on, step it up. But what are you going to do in Generation 2 where there is no knockoff? Well, you're going to have to get a bit creative. In Generation 2, if you want to remove the opponent's item, what you can do is run no item and use Thief. So you steal the opponent's item and make it your own. This is really cool in my opinion, and it really shows how powerful leftovers are in Generation 2, that people were willing to go that far. They would run no item on their own Pokemon, and then use a move that has no other utility outside of removing one item. Once you've, like, stolen an item, that's it. You can't get rid of your own leftovers, so it's a one-time thing. But it can be that impactful over the course of a game, and this does happen in Overused. Pokemon like Jinx or Misdreavus, they commonly use Thief to steal the opponent's item, and especially against Pokemon like Zapdos or Snorlax, it can really have a big impact. Now, there are other reasons to run no item, specifically after Generation 5 using Acrobatics. Acrobatics is a 55 base power physical flying type move that doubles in power if you're not holding an item. The reason in Generation 5, if you were using Acrobatics, you wouldn't use no item, is because you were taking advantage of something called Flying Gem Acrobatics. The gems were Generation 5 items that were one-time use items that would boost the power of one move, depending on its type, by 50%. Let's say you have the Fire Gem, and you used Fire Blast. Well, that first Fire Blast is going to have its power increased by 50%, and then the item's gone. The reason this worked so well in Generation 5 with Acrobatics is because the item would be consumed before you actually attack. So, when you pick Acrobatics, the gem is consumed, giving you the power boost, and then you have no item. That means you're getting the more powerful 110 base power Acrobatics, which pretty much gives you a one-time use 165 base power flying type attack, which is really great. However, we'll talk about this more in a minute, gems were pretty much removed from the game after Generation 5. Okay, I'm gonna fucking say it. I'm gonna say the E word. I'm gonna fucking do it. Evasion. Yup. We're gonna talk about Bright Powder, and a couple people mentioned this in my banned strats video, like, hey, wait, doesn't Bright Powder raise your evasion? Why is that allowed? And yeah, it's allowed, but you gotta remember, it's only a 10% boost. Well, it's a 10% boost after Generation 2. In Generation 2, it's a 7.843% boost to your evasion, I think, maybe. My math is really bad. Pretty sure it's that, though. Now, Bright Powder, because of how little it raises your evasion by, it's pretty uncommon, especially before Generation 4, where there were more available ways to boost your evasion. In Generation 2, where the item was introduced, the only Pokemon that you ever see run it is the occasional Umbreon on a trapping set. And that's mainly because on the trapping set, it's very good at stalling out physical attackers because it has Charm to lower attack, but it's not as great against special attackers, so Sand Attack plus Bright Powder is probably your best option to stall them out. That being said, Umbreon is a very bulky Pokemon that likes to be around for a lot of turns, and because of that, the passive recovery of leftovers is pretty invaluable, so it's definitely a hard decision to make. In Generation 4, Frostlass occasionally abuses Bright Powder's evasion boost in combination with Snow Cloak, which gives you a 20% evasion boost when Hail is up. And yeah, in generations with permanent weather, when Sand Veil was banned for boosting your evasion in Sandstorm, Snow Cloak is completely legal. And that might seem weird, but you gotta understand, Sandstorm is great, Hail kinda sucks. Like, look at Sandstorm in the 3 generations with permanent weather. In Generation 3, Sandstorm is a fixture of Overused. It is easily set up by the best Pokemon in the tier. In the majority of games, it goes up, and in 99.9% of those games, it stays up completely uncontested. Generation 4 Overused, Tyranitar is once again one of the best Pokemon in the tier, and now, you've also got Hippowdon who can set up Sandstorm, a great Pokemon in its own right. Generation 5, I know everyone talks about Rain, but Sandstorm is nearly, if not just as good as Rain. Sandstorm is incredibly prevalent in Generation 5, while the other two types of weather, Sun and Hail, they're definitely much more niche. Sun used to be kind of okay until Dugtrio was banned, but Hail has never really been up to par with the other weathers. Obama Snow is the only Pokemon in Generation 4 and 5 who can set up Hail upon switching in, and it's not very good. And again, Frostlass, this Pokemon that can abuse evasion boosting with Snowcloak, it's not very good. Hail just isn't great, so if you actually set up the circumstances where you can abuse the evasion boosts with Bright Powder and Snowcloak, shit, good for you, because it's pretty tough to do, and probably won't win you the game, I'll be honest. Now, earlier I mentioned Flying Gem Acrobatics in Generation 5, and yeah, that's a pretty great combo, and a decent amount of Pokemon use it. However, outside of that, the other gems are kind of niche. They're mainly used on Pokemon that don't want to run a choice item for some reason, maybe they're using a boosting move, but they really need to secure a specific KO that Life Orb just wouldn't get. For example, in Generation 5 Overused, Swords Dance Terrakion may occasionally run Rock Gem, mainly to secure a KO at +2 on Gliscor. It can genuinely be worth it, and of course you have the upside of not having to take recoil from Life Orb, but outside of that there's not a huge amount of gem usage in singles. However, and this is the reason you don't really hear people talk about gems after Generation 5, gems in VGC were massive. Again, VGC, a lot faster paced and a lot more aggressive, so getting that one-time power boost is really big, and because of that, gems were not only nerfed in Generation 6, they were kind of removed. The power boost was decreased from a 50% boost to a 30% boost, and for some reason, the only one you can actually get is the normal gem. The code is in the game for all the other type gems, but you can only actually obtain a normal gem, and I'll tell you right now, after Generation 5, not a single Pokemon in singles runs the nerfed normal gem. It's not worth it. It's a one-time 30% boost to, admittedly, not a very good attacking type. You might think it might be worth it for Explosion or something, but you gotta remember, Generation 5 onwards, Explosion is nerfed, so it's a 30% boost for a move that you honestly don't see that much in the first place. Now there's one more case of a niche item I wanted to talk about, but I gotta be honest, this one's kind of stretching it, because not only is it niche, it's only used on a Pokemon that kind of fucking sucks. You're probably familiar with berries that, for one time, reduce the damage of a super effective attack by half, and they're mainly used in doubles, but you do occasionally see them in singles, specifically for problematic matchups. However, did you know that there's also a berry for normal type attacks, even though they really can't be super effective, and that's the Chilean Berry. The Chilean Berry halves the damage of a normal type attack that you take. Now, that sounds okay, because, you know, doesn't have to be super effective, because normal type attacks can't be super effective. So, just any normal type attack, the damage is cut in half. Although, this doesn't really work in practice, because normal type attacks are not very good, especially from Generation 4 onwards when this was introduced. Now, you might think what this is good for is halving the damage of Explosion, particularly in Generation 4 where it had an effective base power of 500, but not really in practice. You generally want to hit Explosion on bulky Pokemon just to get them out the way so the rest of your team can sweep through whatever's left. And bulky Pokemon aren't really gonna use this. Bulky Pokemon want to stick around for a couple turns, so they want to use items that take advantage of that, like leftovers. In fact, the one Pokemon I found that uses Chilean Berry, well, can use Chilean Berry, because again, this Pokemon's pretty bad, is in Generation 6, Deoxys Normal. Now, Deoxys Normal, typically not very good. It's like a disgusting love child of Deoxys speed and Deoxys attack with a little bit of the actually viable bred out. It's weird. It's pretty much just a shittier Deoxys attack, but instead of dying to every attack in the game in one hit, it just dies in one hit most of the time. So anyway, Chilean Berry and Deoxys normal work together to sort of, again, sort of, this is a bit of a stretch, sort of check Extreme Killer Arceus. Extreme Killer Arceus is the normal type Arceus, which is usually one of the better ones because it can use any item. It's not, you know, restricted to any type of a plate. And it also gets Stab Extreme Speed, which is really, really scary. Now, what this set aims to do is use Chilean Berry to survive a +2 boosted Extreme Speed from Arceus, and then knock it out with counter. That technically works, but geez, it's a bit of a stretch. You're not using a very good Pokemon in the first place, and I feel like because Deoxys normal is already such a niche pick, if the opponent sees Deoxys normal and they're using Extreme Killer Arceus, I feel like they're probably gonna know what's going on. So, you could argue whether this is niche or not, but I do think it's very interesting nonetheless. Okay, I actually kind of lied. I do have one more niche use of an item I want to talk about, and that is whatever the fuck you want. Listen, if you have an idea and you think it can work, give it a shot. I feel like a lot of newer competitive Pokemon players kind of feel like they have to either blindly follow the meta, or they just like go completely off the wall and do some wacky shit. Listen, the meta exists for a reason, but don't be afraid to try new stuff. That's how meta developments happen. That's why, you know, Pokemon don't just sit in the same tier forever. Pokemon that are in borderline occasionally rise up to overused, and Pokemon that are in much, much lower tiers occasionally rise up further than that, you know? That's just how meta developments happen. You gotta experiment now and again and try something new to see if it'll work. No one 20 years ago in Generation 1 was saying, hey, you know Porygon? Yeah, that borderline joke Pokemon that's complete dog shit? Yeah, you ever think about how it completely counters several of Snorlax's best sets? No, no one fucking said that 20 years ago, but it's actually kind of true. Don't be afraid to try something new. You might be surprised. Peace.